going to do today is look at some of the poets, only 3 poets today, that wrote about men in the Bible. Now, I'm going to deviate from what I usually do. We are going to read together the poems and you'll help me analyze them. And then I'll put my input. The 3 poets that I'm going to talk about are Natan Zach, Dan Pagis, and Moshe Dor. They are 3 leading poets. One was born in Germany, that's Zach, and came to Israel when he was 5 years old. The other was born in Romania and was a Holocaust survivor and came to Israel at the age of 16. And the third one is the only native one, Moshe Dor. What is very interesting that the first 2 have become leaders of Hebrew poetry, though it wasn't their mother tongue. What we are going to look at, how their poetry, alluding to the Bible and using the biblical text, really convey the constant fear of the Israeli of another Holocaust. This is something constant that is in the back of our minds all the time, and the fear of destruction and loneliness in the world. Israel is very conscious about the fact that it might be very much alone when things happen. And the Bible is used as a stepping stone very often in order to convey these ideas. What we're going to look at is how they use the biblical myth in order to convey meaning and to cope with their fears, and do they use it to its limitations, or do they manipulate it to suit their own ideas? So that's what we are going to do together. The first one we are going to talk about is not the poem that is number 1. That will be the last one, I'm sorry. The one we're going to deal with is When God Said, okay? And we will read the biblical verse and then the poem. But I'll tell you a few words about Natan Zach. You know by now that he was born in Germany in 1930, and he came to Israel at the age of 6. His parents, that's very interesting. His father was a German Jew, and he fought in the Kaiser's army in the First World War, and his mother was Catholic, Italian Catholic. Now the 2 didn't have any common language. Whoa. And he really doesn't understand why they ever married. And what he could remember is that gestures were part of their language and fighting was much of their language. And also, what they had in common is the wish, the desire to run away. So in 1936, they ran away from Germany to what was then Palestine, Eretz Israel, and there he started his career. He started his career in Haifa, where Gadi and I started, in the same school that we went to. And he published his first poetry book in 1955, and strangely enough, he became the leader of the new Hebrew poetry. Why is it so important? Because he deviates from the language of Bialik and Chernyakhovsky and Alterman and Goldberg. He doesn't use rhymes so much, and his use of language is more the spoken language than the more literary language. And this is something very unique. And he's going to create a new school, if one could say that, in modern Hebrew literature, in modern Hebrew poetry, sorry. Now he is also he's manipulating the text. He takes the biblical text and switches it, puts it upside down on its head. And we're going to see it in a couple of minutes. He was also an editor, and he created a new group of poets called Likrat, towards, facing something new. And he, as I said, he was a major influence. He also translated a lot from German, from English. He translated, as you can see, oh, you can't say, Allen Ginsberg into Hebrew. And he translated many plays from German into Hebrew, etc., etc. Now, the first poem we are going to look at is When God First Said. But before that, we are going to read Genesis. So, who would like to be my reader today? Please, Sonia. Genesis.
In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. Now the earth was unformed and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God hovered over the face of the waters. And God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. And God saw the light, and that it was good. And God divided the light from the darkness. And God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening, and there was morning one day.
Okay, now we are going to see what Zach is making out of this passage. Anyone? Volunteers? When God first said.
When God first said, "Let there be light," he meant it would not be dark for him. In that moment, he didn't think about the sky, but the trees already were filling with water, the birds receiving air in their body. Then the first wind touched God's eyes, and he saw it in all his glory and thought, "It is good." He didn't think then about people in their multitude, but they already were standing apart from the fig leaves, unraveling in their hearts a scheme about pain. When God first thought of night, he didn't think about sleep.
Okay, I would like to hear your comments. How is manipulating the baby? What is he doing? The relationship between God and human beings is one of the central themes in modern Hebrew poetry. And let's see what he's doing here.
Well, it seems to me that we always think of God as knowing what's going to be happening. And here the poet says he was only thinking of himself, apparently, when there was brought light, and he wasn't even contemplating the future of the trees coming in and the birds. He wasn't even thinking about that.
Right. Okay, Judith?
Yeah, it's like this. It's very close. It's similar a little bit to the concept of the Greek Olympian gods that were kind of anthropomorphized, or they were like subjective. They had their whims, and it looks like capricious and whimsical. And he didn't want dark for him, but paradoxically, the dark came from the people, from their focus on pain, and he didn't think about sleep, which I think he was thinking about eros, but people were thinking about pain. This was what created the problems.
Yeah.
It
Like
does
love or something.
It doesn't say that, but okay. It's a very self-centered God. That God couldn't care less about what's going to happen, right? And there is no correlation whatsoever between that God and human beings. They have a scheme of their own, and their scheme is pain. And here we have, of course, the allusion to the Holocaust, because this is going to be an undercurrent in all the points that we are going to read. And the creation keeps evolving by itself. He just said, "I want light," because he doesn't want to be in the dark. And things start happening. And as Willie said, he has no control. He doesn't know what's going to happen. And human beings, as I said, keep multiplying. And they become stronger than the omnipotent, than the divine spirit. They are so many that they are stronger than God. And that's why their scheme is going to happen. And we don't know whether he had a scheme in mind or just a wish for that. Yeah.
The main thing for me is there is no law in this cosmic picture. There is no law.
Right.
No laws. It's very chaotic, and it's much more. I mean, if human being invented pain and suffering and the Holocaust, but God invented chaos, and chaos is what is. So it's just contradictory to creation because creation is anti-chaos.
Is
no
order.
here.
There
No
is no
here.
order, exactly.
It's-
Because after the Holocaust, there was a question of how could it happen? If there is law and order, how could it happen? We are going just to, and what it's based on is the verse, for the intention of men's heart is evil from its It's not good. No, Gadi, this one. We're going just to listen for a couple of minutes to the song by Mati Kasi, singing this poem in Hebrew. So I didn't find.
שאלוהים אמר בפעם הראשונה יהי אור הוא התכוון שלא יהיה לו חשוך הוא לא חשב באותו רגע על השמיים אבל העצים כבר החלו מפעלים במים וציפורים קיבלו אוויר פגור אז נשבה הרוח הראשונה אל מלבוננו והוא ראה אותה כמו עיני ענן כבודו וחשב טוב הוא לא חשב באותו רגע על בני האדם בני אדם לרוב אבל הם כבר התחילו לחשוב על הזמן בלי ידים הוא כבר החל המתרקמת בליבם נזימה על מחור שאדוננו חשב בתחילת הלילה הוא לא חשב עד שיניים כך הנה מאושר אמר בליבו האלוהים הטוב האלוהים הטוב אבל הם כבר היו
We are going next one, Gadi, next one. He went back.
Went back.
Yeah, he went back. This one. We are going.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment about the song. The song to me seemed to really reinforce the feeling of chaos, the feeling of, I mean, he put in the composition of that music was all this chaos and non-understanding and it was and the how could it happen and all that he captured in the song.
Thank you so much. If anybody wants to forward the song via email, just let me know, okay? I'll gladly do that. We are going to read the next Natanzach and come back to it later. And we're going to go now to Dan Pagis. Dan Pagis is a very interesting case. He was born in Romania in 1930. His mother died when he was 4 years old. His grandparents were a very wealthy family. When his mother died, his father went to Israel, to Palestine, in order to find some sort of interesting work, business. He had crazy ideas. He wanted to bring over to Israel butter. And in those days, to get butter from Poland or Romania to Israel was quite a problem. Anyways, and in the meantime, he lived with his grandparents, who were very aristocratic and made his life very miserable. He couldn't play, he couldn't act normal. I mean, he had a German governess, etc., etc. The father came back when he was 11 and wanted to take him back with him to Israel, to Palestine in those days. And the grandparents said no. In the meantime, the father goes back. The Second World War breaks out. He is taken to the concentration camp for 4 years. When he comes out of the concentration camp, he is about 16, and the father sends him money to go to Palestine in first class, via first class on a boat. When he comes, no first class. The money was paid, they give him fourth or fifth or God knows what. He meets a guy, a Jewish guy from his town, who says, you are looking for some forms, etc., etc. I'll keep watch over your things. When he comes back, the man is gone, the things are gone. He comes to Palestine. There is no one in the port. The father went with a new girlfriend to a movie or to a show. He is devastated. What happens is that the father thought it's the day after that he was supposed to come, but he never forgave his father for that. He goes to a kibbutz. He knows a little bit of Hebrew. He studies there and he becomes a teacher. He becomes a teacher, and they send him to a teacher's college, Seminar Kibbutzim. There he is going to meet Leah Goldberg, one of the leading Israeli poets, and some other poets, Tuvia Rivner. Those who don't know them, it's okay, but very leading poets who start to take care of him, to sponsor him. And he goes to study at the Hebrew U, and strangely enough, he becomes a leading authority on medieval poetry, on Hebrew medieval poetry, and writes books about that. He meets his wife, she is also a Holocaust survivor, Ada. I knew both of them. So he meets her, but they keep fighting like cat and dog. He is broken. He is all the time reliving the horrors of the Holocaust, and she too. So, but she's doing everything. He's just yelling, she's doing the rest of the work. And they have 2 children. They have twins. And we read one of his poems last time. And I have it here, and we are going also to listen to the music that was written to that poem, and then go to the biblical poetry, the one that has to do with Cain and Abel. Here in the carload on Eve was Abel, my son. If you see my older son Cain, son of Adam, tell him that I. Now we are going to listen to the music.
Dan?
זה עולה? said, right. So we go now to Genesis and the first murder. And Cain said to his brother Abel, and when they were in the field, Cain set upon his brother Abel and killed him. The Lord said to Cain, "Where is your brother Abel?" And he said, "I do not know. Am I my brother's keeper?" Then he said, "What have you done? Hark, your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground. Therefore you shall be more cursed than the ground, which opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. If you till the soil, it shall no longer yield its strength to you. You shall become a ceaseless wanderer on earth." Now let's see what Lalpabis is going to make out of this. Bilan, would you like to read the English version, please? Autobiography.
I died with the first blow and was buried among the rocks of the field. The raven told my parents what to do with me. If my family is famous, not a little of the credit goes to me. My brother invented murder. My parents invented grief. I invented silence. Afterwards, the well-known events took place. Our inventions were perfected. One thing led to another. Orders were given. There were those who murdered in their own way, grieved in their own way. I won't mention names out of consideration for the reader, since at first the details horrify, though finally they are a bore. You can die once, twice, even 7 times, but you can't die 1,000 times. I can. My underground cell reached everywhere. When Cain began to multiply on the face of the earth, I began to multiply in the belly of the earth. And my strength has long been greater than his. His legions desert him and go over to me, and even this is only half a revenge.
Anybody?
It's a very sad commentary on humanity.
That's for sure. The poems we're going to read today, I'm not very happy, I'm sorry. But I didn't write them. So. First of all, Abel here is speaking for all the 6 million who have died. And the effect of his death on his family, they become important because of his death. Otherwise, who would have known them? And he and his family really invented the scheme of pain, if we go back to that, and the scheme of grief, and the scheme of murder. And since his parents have never been faced with death before, because they lived in paradise, as we know, they didn't know what to do when he died. They had to ask the raven for advice, how to bury him, what to do with the corpse. And later on, human beings elaborated on this invention of murder. They became better and better at that, more accomplished at that. He is, of course, very cynical, very ironic. And his look at things, the way he looks, his view, is very distorted very often, if one could say that. He distorts what the Bible says and conveys his own meaning, his own fears, his own pain, which is enormous. And the poem is an attempt by the murdered person to relate the history of all murders. Yet, the poem really emphasizes that the murdered are outnumbering the ones who murder them. So they are victorious because there are so many. Judith, you wanted to say something.
No, you know what, it's funny, I didn't know this poem of his, and it is very shocking. And for me, especially that it is not in the original, but in a different language, it is reaching me much more powerful. And this, really the climactic place is when he says, I can die
A million times.
a million times.
Right,
And this
right.
is, I just, it's just so emotionally powerful.
The other shocking thing is when he says, my brother invented murder.
Right.
Cain and Abel.
Familiar family responsibility.
Yeah, yeah. And in a way, everybody who is a descendant of Cain, because he was the only one left, though they had other children later on, Adam and Eve. But those who are direct descendants of Cain are really the descendants of a murderer.
It bothered me a little bit because, even though it's biblical, it's as though he's taking a little bit of the blame himself.
It's like he's giving it the blame to the reader, too.
My brother invented murder.
It runs in the family.
But
Yeah.
he says, I won't mention names out of consideration for the reader.
Yeah.
He's including the reader as the
Yeah.
bad guy.
Well, you usually, this is what not what I wanted to say, but when you go to a memorial, you hear the list of names or towns being read, and it is endless. But my thought was about the raven, not Edgar Allan Poe's raven, but the raven as a carnivore. The raven is used by other cultures to pick the bones of the dead until the bones are cleaned and they can be put into an ossuary or something else. I've seen this in India, and it's a horrific image, but then what are the worms doing underneath the ground? But he speaks about the raven taught my parents, and the raven is supposed to be a bird that speaks as well, and these are different images from different parts of literature. The raven speaks, the raven tells, it's always evil, but it's an evil message that's coming. The raven brings evil, unlike the dove, which has another image. But the raven is also a carnivore, and they laid him under the rocks, but the raven's gonna eat them all.
How interesting.
Well, it's almost as though the raven is responsible in some way for our immortality, in that we become part of the raven.
That's a different issue, but it's a different concept.
A different concept.
I was struck by the line, I invented silence, because that silence, the silence of the murdered he's saying is so powerful. And he said later, my underground cells reach everywhere.
Right.
So there are all these murdered in the earth, and the weight of their silence is, I think, what he's talking about, where they have, they're victorious over the murderers.
Could it have something to do with the silence that a lot of people who are victims of something like a Holocaust won't talk about it?
Closed mouth.
We're going to go to another poem of his, Dan Pagis. It's art.
I'm just gonna ask you, do you think the light makes it easier or harder to read?
I don't know.
Let me close the light and see the content.
Okay. This one? Okay. This is the story of Noah and the flood. And before we go into the poem, we're going to see a short, animation of the story of Noah. And I hope you like it.
Bought food in the boat, and then saw that his wife and his sons and their wives were safely inside. Then he shut the big door behind him, and he bolted it. Then, and the thunder roared as it Big black clouds hid the sun so that it was almost as dark as night. And out of those clouds came the greatest rain the world has ever known. It lasted for 40 days and 40 nights, as God had promised Noah. All the land was covered with water, and not a house or a living thing remained anywhere. But Noah's ark floated on the surface of the waters, and he and his family, and the animals who were in the ark with them, were saved. On the 40th day, the rain stopped and the sun came out. The waters that had covered the earth began to flow back into the oceans and the rivers, and the ark came to rest on the peak of a mountain. But Noah wasn't quite sure that there was enough dry land for all his animals to live on. So he took one of the doves and let it fly out of the window. In a little while, it came back, and in its beak, the dove carried the branch of an olive tree. Noah knew that this must be a sign from God that he had restored quiet and peace to the world. So he opened the door of the ark, and he and his family and all the animals came out on the dry land, and they praised God and thanked him. Then the Lord appeared again to Noah. He promised him that he would never again send a flood to destroy the earth. And he sealed that promise with a beautiful symbol, which he set in the sky for all of us to see. That symbol, the token of God's everlasting faith in man, is the rainbow.
That's the story of
Non-threatening.
Excuse me?
It's non-threatening because it's done for
Yeah, I wanted to make it light. Yeah,
There was no death.
yeah. But now let's see what Dan Pagis is going to do with that story, and we are going to read the poem Ararat. And I need a reader.
Where is it first? Because I know.
Ararat.
Looks like this.
That's okay, I'll find it.
It looks like that? Please. Okay, go ahead, read it.
While all the Ark survivors lurched onto land and in joyful disarray, chattered and roared and shouted for prey, and howled for procreation, and overhead came the rainbow and said, no such end would happen again. The end did come, for the carefree fish that had lived off the mishap, like smooth speculators. Now on stiffening soil they were caught, their fins disheveled, and with mouths gaping wide they died, drowning in air.
Okay. Okay.
He had a different ending, didn't he?
A very different ending.
Fish are carnivores.
And the question is, who are the fish?
Right, who are the speculators?
Yeah.
Are the speculators the Jews?
Let's ask ourselves,
The German Jews?
first of all, you might be right. First of all, the flood is ending and the world as we know it is not going to be there anymore. And Ararat, גדי, אתה מסתיר נורא, is a physical anchor, and it's in opposition, or it's just opposite to the flood. Something very solid, steady there, soil. There is salvage, there is joy, there is a rainbow, but there is an end to something else, to the fish. The fish are going to die. And we are going to ask ourselves, who are these fish that their mouth gaping wide, drowning in air? Who are these fish?
The first thing that came to my mind was the analogy to the breast of Ima Courage. The people.
Mother Courage.
The people that for them a war or a catastrophe is also an opportunity. And it ties with Nathan Zach's poem that the things are chaotic, they are contradictory. But this is one thing, but the fish as I see it specifically, again, this is what I get, is that the guys that were the evil ones, they are the ones that are going to be punished, and that's good. I mean, for me, the picture is the Nuremberg judgment of
Trials.
of the,
So you're going to the Germans,
right.
the Nazi, the victimizer. Anybody else has an idea? You had an idea.
Well, the fish are the ones that he says are the speculators. The fish that had lived off the mishap like smooth speculators. It seems to me that he's alluding to the German Jews who did well financially off the financial panic in the 20s and the early 30s that then brought Hitler to power.
Okay.
Maybe, I don't know.
Anybody else? Yeah.
For me, it's the survivors.
The survivors are the fish, and they are going to drown. Okay.
Humanity.
Humanity. Okay. Anybody else?
A very literal idea. I mean, I remember from a long time ago about Noah and the ark, you know, and it never occurred to me that obviously there were a lot of things left alive. Trees, now where did these trees come from? After they'd been flooded for 40 days, and where did the fish, what about all the microorganisms and all the, you know, there's a whole lot more that isn't obvious. And I don't know where that's going, it's just, that's what is coming up for me.
I thought that this was also saying that for part of humanity, the ark was safer than the ending of the flood, and that they couldn't deal with dry land, and I'm trying to puzzle that out. What was wrong with dry land for this part of humanity, and why was the ark safer?
Okay.
But
The first two lines. While all the ark survivors lurched onto land and in joyful disarray chattered and roared and shouted for prey and howled for procreation. And overhead came the rainbow. So we've got, nobody's learned very much in the 40 days on that ark, except to get off and be nuts.
and where are they gonna get their prey?
All right.
Well, they weren't allowed to eat the animals on the ark,
That's right.
because those were needed for the future zoos, right?
Except
Yeah.
that,
Maybe there wasn't enough room to be private, and there certainly wasn't enough choice of partners. You know, I thought that his children brought their own.
so where do they get
Well,
their
it isn't
prey
just-
while they procreate?
You eat what? Sorry, that was just
It's
my.
not just the humans who want the procreation, those animals can hardly wait to get to it too.
Sure.
We've got to fill up the earth as fast as we possibly can, so that there isn't going to be any sweetness and light anywhere. There wasn't before, and there isn't gonna be now.
Keshet's a good promise.
The rainbow.
Why does he use the adjective carefree fish? Fish are not doing something with volition, with a forethought. There's just, they eat, they swim, they move. They're not cognitive beings with malice or forethought. I don't see,
So then why
why are they
speculators?
speculators? Why does he make them guileful instead of guileless? Carefree means guileless.
He has this thing with fish. We're going to see it when we come
Okay,
to
so
Jonah.
he has other thoughts.
He has, the fish is for him something very important, and we're going to see it.
Okay.
Anyways, I would like to continue what you started, because I read some critics are saying that these are the Jews, really, the Jews who lived on other Jews during the Second World War. And those who were couple, etc., etc. You know, I really don't know. I'm putting this as a question, but that's one of the explanations. Who are these fish and while they are drowning in the air. Another writer, who we are not going to discuss today, and I don't know if in the future is or not, is Aaron Appelfeld, who wrote a lot about the Holocaust. And for him, when the Holocaust survivors become free, they really died. They died, first of all, because they don't have the company that they used to keep. They were together all the time, and they felt secure in a very strange, crazy way, upside down, really. And the second thing, that they weren't used to eating. And when they became free, they ate so much that they died because of the food that they were eating. He has published many books about the Holocaust, and he was nominated for the Nobel Prize several times. But that's another idea just to throw in. Yes, please.
It also occurred to me that that the fish whose fins were disheveled and their mouths were gaping, and they were drowning, and they died, that those were the survivors who afterwards could not handle things.
Please.
Well, the fish are cut off from their natural habitat. And it's, for me, it's like he's saying, the danger of being disconnected from your true nature.
Like himself, maybe he is the fish because he's disconnected from his home country.
Yeah.
And he is landing in a new country, and maybe he's drowning, really. That's another idea to be thrown in. We're going to move now. I hope it's not too quick, that I'm not working on it. It's okay? We are going to go back to Zach, only music. Only music. Only music. Okay? And perhaps only music.
Looks like this.
And it's after Samuel 1, 18, 10 to 16. No, I didn't number them. I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Very.
Trying to show what it looks like.
Alon, why won't you read Samuel, okay? Yeah. Alon is my cousin's son. We got one man. That's the family. Gadi too, right? I forgot. It's a husband, so it's no man.
Not a relative.
Right.
So he's required. The next day, an evil spirit of God gripped Saul, and he began to rave in the house while David was playing the lyre.
The lyre.
Oh, the lyre, as he did daily. Saul had a spear in his hand, and Saul threw the spear, thinking to pin David to the wall. But David eluded him twice. Saul was afraid of David, for the Lord was with him and had turned away from Saul. So Saul removed him from his presence and appointed him chief of 1,000 to march at the head of the troops. David was successful in all his undertakings, for the Lord was with him. And when Saul saw that he was successful, he dreaded him. All Israel and Judah loved David, for he marched at their head.
Now let's see what Nathan Zach is going to make out of that. And perhaps only music. He is playing the lyre, the harp, and let's see what happens. Anybody willing to read? I need a reader.
Let me try.
Please.
Okay. And perhaps only music. And perhaps only music. Since the emotion is obscure, call it what you wish. Only music, perhaps. Here it is, of an evening, hesitant in the absence of strong feeling, uncertain. So David, in his day, must have played, but Saul didn't suspect. Manly and confident, he hurled his spear, as if in David's song there stood forth matters final and clear-cut, like the severed head of Goliath.
First of therefore remember that it's the artist speaking. The poet is speaking. And music and poetry go together. So let's see what he's trying to say here.
What didn't Saul suspect?
Saul had the evil spirit. Okay? And he's afraid of David. Right? But in order to feel better, he has David playing in front of him. He has the harp, the lyre, God knows. Yeah.
But David can play those instruments,
Right.
and he can play them beautifully.
And Saul can't.
And he can't, and that is threatening in and of itself.
Yeah, and he's envious. He's also envious. So he wants to stop the music, to stop art, to stop David, and he takes the spear and he hurls it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very interesting. He has, I think, here develops the concept of art or music, which symbolizes all arts, is the only salvation from his human being, because it is very fertile with freedom. It is freedom from the burden of the deterministic gravity of pain or evilness that the Bible says that the heart of human being is evil from its birth. So the music is when you create, the creativity is somehow transcends all the evilness, and it creates possibilities of freedom that doesn't exist in reality. And this is very interesting, because for me I compare it to the way any kind of ideology projects its own ideology on the art. Like, for example, Nazism kind of nationalized Wagner music and made it militant, or the way emotion and kind of create something different. But this concept is very new to me, very beautiful.
It's also the struggle between art and force and power. And power doesn't understand the beauty of art. And once he does understand that though David looks very soft and hesitant, when he realizes that, Saul is going to try and kill him, because he understands that the power of art might be even stronger than the power of the spear, of the sword. And indeed, David could kill Goliath just with a stone and not with a sword or a spear. And David comes out of this poem not only as an artist, but as a man who can combine force and art, power and art, and not just one thing. And the same movement of the hand, like the hurling of the spear, is the hurling of the stone against Goliath. We have the same movement.
But the Lord is with David and not with Saul.
Right,
So
right.
that's-
The Lord is giving Saul the evil spirit.
What about the title, and perhaps only music?
Only music can save us.
Or this, wow.
Nathan Zach was fascinated with music. He used to say, I play, but I can't play, although I can't play. Music for him was something that he was just captivated by. And the language, poetry has a lot of music in it. It's very melodious very often. ואולי רק נגינה, רק נגינה. If you hear what I'm, in English, well, perhaps only music, it's the,
Something melodious.
it's, yeah.
And it's rhythmic.
Melodious, רק נגינה.
There's a
רק
rhythm to it.
נגינה, רק נגינה, ואולי רק נגינה, רק נגינה, והרוח הרעה. It's very melodious.
But music might transcend everything else.
Right.
even strength and power.
Right.
And even goodness and music is stronger than anything else. Wow, that's quite a statement.
Yeah, very different from Haggis, right? Yeah, please.
On the other hand, perhaps what David was doing was only playing music. It was only music, it was not a challenge.
Oh, that's a very good point, very interesting.
It seems as if Saul interpreted it as a challenge, and that's why he hurled the spear.
Very good point. We're going to move forward, please. We are back to Puggies, to the book of Jonah, and we are going to watch a little animation about Jonah. And don't fret, though it has subtitles in Hebrew, you are going to understand it very well. Okay? It's tidings. We're going to go into tidings. He's trying to run away, if you remember the story. And he goes to another ship, not to Nineveh. And the sailors are going to throw him overboard, if you remember.
He's going to sleep.
Yeah, but now they are going to throw him. That's it. Now we're going to read the poem by Dan Puggies. And it's called Tidings.
We're not gonna read Jonah first?
Yeah, where is Jonah? Jonah, and then Dan Puggies.
In the belly of a whale.
Yeah. Okay, Jane, would you like to read Jonah?
All right. The Lord provided a huge fish to swallow Jonah, and Jonah remained in the fish's belly 3 days and 3 nights. Jonah prayed to the Lord his God from the belly of the fish. He said, "In my trouble I called to the Lord, and he answered me from the belly of
Sheol,
Sheol.
hell.
I cried out, and you heard my voice. You cast me into the depths, into the heart of the sea. The floods engulfed me. All your breakers and billows swept over me. I thought I was driven away out of your sight. Would I ever gaze again upon your holy temple? The waters closed over me. The deep engulfed me. Weeds twined around my head. I sank to the base of the mountain. The bars of the earth closed upon me forever. ebbing away, I called the Lord to mind, and my prayer came before you, into your holy temple. They who cling to empty folly forsake their own welfare. But I, with loud thanksgiving, will sacrifice to you. What I have vowed, I will perform. Deliverance is the Lord's. The Lord, no, that's the, deliverance is the Lord's.
The Lord
The Lord
commanded.
commanded the fish and it spewed Jonah out upon dry land.
Now we're going to see tidings, what Puggis is going to make of our fish. Read it. No reader? Please.
The great fish that vomited out Jonah swallowed nothing more. Without any prophecy in his guts, he pined away.
Can't hear it.
I can't hear you.
Start over
I'm
loud.
sorry. The great fish died, and the sea vomited him out onto dry land. 300 cubits of disappointed and forsaken flesh in the light of the end of day. Then they were merciful to him, an omen of things to come in a moment. Gangs of crabs surrounded him, delighted in him, picked him clean. After all the tidings, there remained on the desert beach the skeletons, caverns, columns, gates, secret entranceways, a city of refuge for an escaped wind. Everything has been fulfilled.
Okay. How does he manipulate the text?
Suddenly it's about the whale.
Right, and not about Jonah. And the poor whale, the poor fish. You remember the fish? We had the fish before.
I think the skeleton and the whale, everything that's done to the whale, that's the survivors.
Okay.
What about the city of refuge? The thing that, one of the things is left, in the cavern, or columns, gates, entranceways, a city of refuge. And, what do you make of that?
Maybe for those who escaped, for those who survived.
Left without any spirit, left without any strength,
Yeah,
left dead really,
yeah,
just a skeleton.
yeah.
And what about everything has been fulfilled?
Prophecy.
What prophecy?
Of disaster.
What
Prophecy of Jonah.
Of disaster of Nineveh.
out from
So Nineveh is destroyed.
No, wasn't sure.
So which prophecy has been fulfilled? If it's not Nineveh.
Whatever it was.
Jonas, he wanted it to be destroyed.
No, he didn't want it to be destroyed. He refused to go.
he just said, I don't want to go.
Whatever, if you say that Hashem was not on duty, was not paying attention during the Shoah, or whatever you wanna say about it, then this is what happened in the absence of Hashem.
Right. The container doesn't contain any spirit. And where is the spirit? It's going back to Zach's point. The spirit is self-centered, couldn't care less. There is no spirit. So when the whale is there, it doesn't contain anything. So it's really the relationship between God and its creations, its vessels. And God is not there. Yeah, please.
Something, tidings has multiple meanings.
Right.
One is news, information to come. Tidings, here he says, after all the tidings they remain, so every time the tide comes in, so that's a poetic use of the word. But city of refuge must,
Oh, the whale was a refuge for
That's what I
Jonah.
thought, that's what I thought. The whale itself was a sea of refuge.
A temporary refuge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This one really.
The city of refuge, the whale, is reduced to nothing.
No, I know the concept of city of refuge and the why and the wherefore, both at that time, I think in a timeline. In that time, if you had done something evil or wrong, or others thought you had done, once you touch base, you're at the city, they can't touch you. You can't, I'm safe.
Only for certain crimes.
But they're,
Right,
but it's saying that there's no more refuge.
okay.
Well,
Symbolically, fish often have a transcendent connotation, and it fits with what you were saying, that it's quite shocking to me that the whale dies, and, because we don't expect that to happen. And it's like the loss of that transcendent quality, which is really talking about the loss of spirit.
Really?
I'm seeing a couple things here, possibly. Let me just throw out some ideas. The whale dying could be the Holocaust. The beach, the deserted beach could be Palestine, Israel. Because in the death, then this beach was given, this cavern, column, gate, secret entranceway, city of refuge for an escaped win. Anybody who escaped got to go. I don't know.
Maybe, yes. Yeah.
At first, I thought that it is connected to the it's like it's connected to the story of the artist, that he's only a vessel. Inspiration and everything, and the relationship between inspiration or God to the vessel is destructive because the message is so powerful that the vessel is destroyed by it. And if we look at life of artists, when they don't create, they die. It's so difficult. Don Quixote dies after he loses the belief in Dulcinea. It's devastating. The devastation of the artist that is totally dependent, and the prophet always comes, the destruction, and he shows this cruel relationship between the tithing and the destruction. Only the destruction is there, but also if we're talking about, he in a way he's saying that the all tidings of God or spirit are evil in a way. It's beyond that. The tiding itself is evil. It's totally different than Natan Zach's concept of musical salvation. Here, her spirit is all about destruction. Like this is the purpose of it, to destroy. It's a real perversion of this.
Okay. Anybody else?
When he speaks of wind, is he speaking of possibly the whirlwind, the escape wind? I'm trying to make pictures in my. After everything that happened, you have the skeleton. The skeleton is all of these things, but it is only a place for the escaped wind. The wind is ravaging. I don't know. It's very ugly. It's very not ugly. It's disconcerting.
Yeah, Haggis is very disconcerting.
Very uncomfortable.
No doubt about that.
Nothing sweet and lovely.
But that's what he wrote.
Oh,
He
had
did
it-
write children's stories which are very funny. Very
He
funny.
had multiple parts
Yeah.
of his
Yeah,
personality.
yeah.
One can imagine what he experienced in Ukraine as a kid in
the
this
camps.
place, because what I know, it was so much death and devastation there that it's totally unbelievable. So it might affect his subconsciously that this is a map of his childhood on this devastation.
What does it mean where it says everything has been fulfilled?
That's what I'm asking.
Which-
God's promise for the
Yeah.
the tide of the prophecy of devastation that was on Nimrod.
Yeah, but God's prophecy, what prophecy did he have for his people? I mean,
go to Nineveh and tell them that in 4 days they are going to,
Yeah, but Nineveh is saved.
because God, in the Bible, God gave them another chance.
But
And-
in real life, he did not.
In real life.
The
Yeah.
fish died without any prophecy. He pined away. He needed a prophecy, apparently.
Jonah was the prophecy, was inside, and as long as Jonah was there,
The fish has purpose.
yeah.
And if you do not have the Spirit of God within you, then life is not fulfilled. So therefore, the end comes.
Okay, let's go now to the story of Job. And we are going to see some animation and then read the poem.
The story of Job. In a distant land, Job, a man who loves God, has everything he needs. He has 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 1,000 oxen, 500 donkeys, and servants to take care of all his needs. He also has a wonderful family, a wife, 7 sons, and 3 daughters. The Lord has blessed me to overflowing. Up in heaven, God is proud of his righteous servant, but Satan hates to see a happy ending. Job only worships you because you make sure nothing bad ever happens to him. If you don't give him such riches and blessings, he would turn from you in an instant and curse your name. You think so? Very well. You may test him. Take away his blessings, but do not hurt him. Satan wastes no time in striking Job with catastrophe. One day a messenger comes to Job. The Sabaeans attacked. They stole the oxen and donkeys and killed the people working in your fields. I'm the only one who escaped. That same moment, another messenger arrives. Lightning struck the sheep and shepherds. They're all dead. I'm the only one who escaped. Then a third messenger comes. Chaldeans raided the camels and killed the camel drivers. I'm the only one who escaped. Yet another messenger arrives with bad news. Your oldest son's house collapsed, killing all of your children. I'm the only one who escaped. Job is saddened by the loss of his property and livestock, but he is devastated at the death of his children. He shaves off his hair in grief and rips his clothes to tatters, but he does not blame God for this misfortune. I came into this world with nothing, and I will leave it with nothing. God gave, and God took away. Praise be to God. See, Satan, he is a better man than you thought. Well, sure, since I didn't do anything to him or his health, but no one praises God when they're sick. So you think. Ruin his health if you think that will have any effect on this righteous man, but do not kill him. Satan immediately returns to earth and strikes Job with terrible open sores from head to foot. He curses Job with insomnia, and when Job does not sleep, Satan terrifies him with nightmare.
Okay. Now we are going to go into what Haggis has to say about Job, how he's going to use the story of Job. And he calls his poem homily, a sermon, which is really going to lecture or give us some moral lesson. We are going to find out what moral lesson he has to tell us. So I need a preacher now for the sermon. Would you like to read it?
All right. Dan Pegas homily. From the start, the forces were unequal. Satan, a grand seigneur in heaven, Job, mere flesh and blood. And anyway, the contest was unfair. Job, who had lost all his wealth and had been bereaved of his sons and daughters and stricken with loathsome boils, wasn't even aware that it was a contest. Because he complained too much, the referee silenced him. So without accepting this decision, having accepted this decision in silence, he defeated his opponent without even realizing it. Therefore, his wealth was restored, he was given sons and daughters, new ones, of course, and his grief for the first children was taken away. We might imagine that this compensation was the most terrible thing of all. We might imagine that the most terrible thing was Job's ignorance, not understanding whom he had defeated, or even that he had won. But in fact, the most terrible thing of all is that Job never existed and was just a parable.
Before we start talking about the poem, I would like to say that in the Talmud, there is a big discussion about the book of Job. Did Job exist or he didn't exist? And they say Job never existed. האיש איוב לא היה ולא נברא אלא משל היה. זה בבא בתרא. I'm quoting from the Talmud. The Talmud says he never existed because we can't find the city of Oz, the land of Oz. We have never heard about a man called Eov, Job, etc., etc. So if it's just a fable, what does it stand for and what is the moral? Now let's analyze the poem. First of all, it starts with a wager. Satan and God are going to have a contest. And they have a wager, is Job going to curse God or not? And the very idea, we are going back to Zach, that God is not omnipotent. There is other schemes that are stronger maybe. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm going back to the story of Eov. The meaning of the silence. The meaning of the silence is the real. I mean, the real answer or response of God from the storm was that there is no ability to understand God's ways. The silence, I think, represents the mystery of God's ways. But the fact, the way I understand the story of Job in the Bible is that the power of Job in his silence, that there is a mystical salvation in the silence that saves him from evil. And he can endure anything because of it. And this kind of silence I see connected to Natan Zach's music and salvation, because there is something in music which is also silence. It's not non-verbal, it's not non-ideological, it's in a different level. That the salvation must come somehow from within in spite of everything. And in Pagis, he is telling a totally opposite thing. He is talking about his silence as ignorance. He doesn't even know what was the problem, what was the issue. Everything that exists is just primitive, sore evil. That's all. No explanation, no meaning. He's not aware of any ideology that was happening, and that's a terrible thing.
Yeah.
Most of us have known the story quite well. There has been a play on Answer to Job, but one of the questions is that Job doesn't ask, that most of us think of, is why me, God? And the answer is, why not you? And so if that's going to be the answer, then maybe silence is the answer.
Please.
This story has always seemed horrible to me because it's essentially, as with the Greeks and the Romans, the gods wagering, and the people are just pawns. And through no fault of their own, I think it's amoral. It's an amoral story because there's nothing. There's no punishment for any reason. There is no control. And that is really analogous to the Holocaust.
What seems foreign to me is the idea of Satan, because as a modern Jewish person, Satan has played a very small role in the life of my theology or theology.
That's what you think.
Huh?
That's what you think.
And suddenly, Satan plays such a large role that it seems almost un-Jewish.
That's why they had such a big discussion, a debate in the Talmud, whether to put the book of Job into the Bible or not. There is a huge debate about that. So finally, they decided to do it. I mean, to put it in. I have to rush a little bit because we have just 10 more minutes, and I would like to go to the poem, Does David Still Play Before You? And it's Moshe Dor. And Moshe Dor is the only one who was born in Israel and is a native Hebrew speaker. And he's the only one living now in the States. So anyways, again, he was part of the group that Zach formed of innovators in Hebrew literature or in Hebrew poetry. And he was an editor of a very famous newspaper and wrote many books and translated from various languages. And his work has been translated into many, many other languages. He lives, I think, in Milwaukee, I'm not so sure, with a half Lebanese woman who is not Jewish. And he was our cultural attaché for many years in England and I think in the States too. He was in Washington. Now, before I continue, I would like, he wrote a very, very well-known song, Erev Shel Shoshanim.
Oh my goodness.
And I would like you to listen to the music and then we go to less musical stuff.